going back to the context that you set at the start, right? See, criminals are always going to be one step ahead of law enforcement, right? And that's why I think, some of your best forensic analysts are, like past criminals and, hackers. And what we've seen and, what we talked about in terms of the recommendations and the fallouts from the, FATF evaluation, I think the regulatory environment in India is now shifting from what used to be a very reactive, prescriptive kind of an approach to something which is far more proactive in nature, right? And I think one of the guidelines that has recently come out is in terms of doing a very holistic assessment of the internal internal risk that regulated entity carries, right? In this, I think it's a very detailed exercise that has to be carried out considering the nature of the business itself, considering the geographical presence of the regulated entity, considering a lot of market factors as well as a lot of intrinsic factors, right? And although there's going to be a lot of subjectivity in the exercise, right, the guidelines in terms of the overall structure and framework are pretty clear, right? So the way, and this again is not happening in isolation in India, right? I think we have seen very similar guidelines for risk assessment called by various names, financial crime risk assessment, internal risk assessment, happening in, let's say, your UAE or US, where there's been a very structured methodology that's followed in terms of defining at the first level the key risk drivers for a business, broken down into, let's say, your customer, geography, channels, product types. For all of those risk factors, listing out all the relevant risk drivers, right? So for example, if you're talking about, let's say, channels, right? So institution might have like multiple business units. So listing down all of those, doing a complete mapping of all your MLTF sanctions, PF risks, right, factors, and then deciding on, based on, again, your risk strategy and your risk approach, deciding on the overall weightages for those parameters, right, and then coming up with a final subjective score, along with the rationale for why you have assigned something a lower score, right? And again, not all of these factors are relevant for every financial institution. If you do not have, let's say, cross-border payments, then you might not be looking at those kind of factors. But to carry out this exercise, there are two key components. One is defining this larger framework along with all of the relevant attributes, all of the risk drivers. Secondly, this exercise requires a lot of data, right? So you will be looking at, let's say, the concentration of your transactions from different countries, any transaction coming from any sanctioned entities, sanctioned countries. So to have all of that data as part of this exercise, right, for the first time is going to be very critical, right? And once we have, once a regulated entity has completed the exercise for the first time, doing the refresher on a periodic basis becomes easier if you maintain and if you have this entire framework finalized, right? So I think from our perspective of working with, let's say, multiple other banking institutions in US, in UK, in UAE, what we have seen is that the first discussion or the first assessment is the most critical part. Once you have that, right, based on that, I think you are able to firm up your policies, your guidelines, your frameworks, your internal data management policies, every single thing, and then doing that as a refresher on an incremental basis becomes easier.